Know that Ben Franklin sounded like a cheap Morgan Freeman, did you? Like a budget Morgan Freeman voice actor. So, hey, good morning. Good morning to everybody that's joining us online as well. My name is Chris Kretzu. I'm the campus pastor here. If you guys don't know, South Hills is a family of churches. We've got a bunch of churches all over the place, and we're actually launching a new one on Easter Sunday. It's going to be in Manhattan Beach. We're super excited to have another one just right up the coast. So thank you guys for being here, and thanks, Andrew, for being with us this morning. Jamie, it was her anniversary this week, and so she had the opportunity to have a Sunday off and get a little bit of rest. But it's great to be here with you guys. We're starting a new series all about money. And here's the thing, a lot of people kind of associate money with evil, and there's some confusion here. And money is actually not evil. Money is neutral. It's neither good or bad. Money can be used for good or for bad, but it's a neutral thing. And so I think it's also important for us because sometimes we don't even realize or take the time to think about or acknowledge that this reality that we live in right now hasn't always, dollars haven't always been money. Money was a challenge before it was green dollar bills with talking Ben Franklin's on it. There was jewels, there was gold, there was agriculture, there's the stuff that makes us have enough or have a little, the stuff that causes us to feel like we have some ounce element, some ability of power. It has this entrancing effect on us in our hearts. And so when we do a series about money or finances, it's actually not really about money per se. It's actually about our relationship with money. I'm not going to teach you about the history of money. We're going to talk for the next few weeks about what does it look like for us to engage, and what is our relationship with money, with finances, with stuff. What does that look like, and how is a better way for us to live? That's where the issue is. So we just finished a series on relationships with people. Now we're going to talk about our relationship with stuff, and we're gonna make it happen this week. My younger son had his second loose tooth, and my older son is the one that kid's like pulling his own teeth out to get the tooth fairy to show up, and my younger one has been terrified, and we thought that it was actually the fear of like having a tooth come out or be pulled out. It turns out he was terrified of the tooth fairy coming into his room at night, which is, in hindsight, it's a little creepy, I guess, But the love of money has overcome his fear of the tooth fairy. This week it was loose, and it was like hurting him, and Ez was trying to make him feel better, and she's like, you know what, buddy? Like, if a tooth comes out, the tooth fairy will come, you get $1. And he's like, maybe this time I'll get $10. And it was just like this moment of like, okay, enough, But what I wanted to say in that moment was, when I was a kid, I only got a quarter. But isn't that like the ultimate like parent trump card? Like that when I was a kid, you get the uphill and the snow both ways. But I have this thing, I do this with my kids all the time, and it's so frustrating, for me to hear them, and probably for them to hear, like, okay, here goes dad again, talking about when he was a kid, back in the last century, all these different things. And so, but it's funny because my kids, will go on a trip to Palm Springs. It's, it's an hour, 2 hours drive, whatever it is. And they're like complaining about how long it is. When I was a kid, the only vacations we got to go on were a trip in our family minivan. It was a 9-hour drive to New Jersey. So, appreciate what you have. Yeah, I got some New Jersey people back here. When I was a kid, my mom sewed my clothes. Like, I didn't get to go shopping, which is mostly true. So that's cool. That's, why I am the way that I am. But there's this moment where, with our kids, as parents, and if you guys aren't parents, you can probably understand this. There's this reality that we want to give our kids something better than we had, not necessarily because what we had was bad, but there's like this desire. We want to give our kids as much as we can. And there are some things where it's like, yeah, I would like my kids to experience this differently. I want my kids to have different experiences. And so we work so hard to give our kids these different experiences, and they don't appreciate it because they've never had our experience, because we made sure they didn't have to have what we had. And then we're frustrated because they don't appreciate it because we made sure that they never even knew what it was like. And it's this crazy cycle. It's like, no, I'm going to work so hard to make sure you have no idea what it could be like. And now I'm angry that you don't know what it could be like. It's this weird cycle that we fall into. It's this trap. And I think that many of us, maybe all of us, are always tempted with questions like, I wonder what else is out there. what I have is okay, but I wonder if there's more. I wonder if I could do better. I wonder if instead of $1, I could get $10. I mean, this is the entire premise of the show, Let's Make a Deal. Do you guys remember that show? It's like you could have thousands of dollars cash, and they're like, there could be something behind this curtain. It might be a coffee mug, or it might be a new home. And it's like, I've got thousands of dollars, but yeah, let's risk it. There might be something better. Like, this is part of who we are as humans. We kind of have this tendency to try and risk and give up what we have, always wondering what else there could be. Scripture starts off with this creation poem. And in the story of humanity, it begins in this poem, it begins in paradise. Two people literally made for each other. Both of them very attractive, not dressed very much at all, surrounded by tropical beauty. They could do almost anything, go anywhere they wanted, no bills, no stress. There was one limitation. They couldn't eat from one tree. They were living in perfect paradise, and it's still, like, they fell into this trap where it still wasn't enough. And God, as frustrated as he could be with their attitude, he said, when I was a kid, I'm just kidding. Every once in a while, guys, I got to have a bad joke, but I think we have to ask ourselves, as we find ourselves in these situations, whatever, you may not feel like, I for sure live in a garden paradise. That may not be what you think. That may not be your scenario. But whatever situation we find ourselves in, I wonder if we would recognize paradise if we were in it. I wonder if we would recognize how much we have as we're in the midst of it. We're going to look at Genesis chapter 3. A few verses here is going to be our kind of main passage that we're looking at this morning. Genesis chapter 3. If you have your Bibles or phones, or it'll be on the screen for your online fam, you guys are going to have it on the screens there for you as well. In verse 1 of Genesis 3, it says, "Now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, 'Did God really say, you must not eat from any tree in the garden?' And the woman said to the serpent, 'We may eat from the trees in the garden, but God did say we must not eat from the tree that's in the middle of the garden. We must not touch it, or we will die.' And then the serpent says, 'You will not certainly die. For God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil.' And when the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. And then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked, so they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves." So this story, as good as everything was, paradise, this beautiful poem about the perfection of creation and everything that they had, there was still this sense, this temptation of, it does look good. I know I can have almost anything I want, but I kind of want that now. I've got everything else, but what about that option? Maybe paradise really isn't paradise. Maybe I'd be happier if I had something different or something more or something else. And I think that we all struggle with this. We could have everything that we have ever wanted, and there's still this sense in us of it's not enough. I wonder what else is out there. Jim Carrey of Ace Ventura fame, he's done a lot more movies than that, but he'll always be Ace Ventura to me. He obviously had a very successful career, and he was quoted as saying this a few years back. He says, "I wish that everyone was rich and famous and had everything they ever dreamed, like me, so that they also can see that it's not the answer." Which is interesting, because, if you look at Jim Carrey's life and the silliness and the wackiness and the antics and the success, and he kind of got to this place where he's still obviously an incredible actor, but like a little bit of a different personality than maybe what he used to have. And I wonder, and I don't know, but I wonder if there's a realization of like, man, everything is up and to the right, and he finally got it all and felt some sense of emptiness, which is what he's articulating. It's not the answer for everything. One of our other modern philosophers was quoted as saying, "Mo money, mo problems." That's Biggie Smalls, if you guys don't know. There is just like a sense with people that have gotten so much, they continue to say, you know what, it actually isn't everything. And for those of us that don't have so much, it's like, well, I'd still like to try. You know, they're like, let me test it out. Let me see if I can do it better than you. But everyone says the same thing. It is not everything. It does not give you everything you want. It is not fulfilling. It doesn't bring wholeness. We all struggle with this. We want more. Adam and Eve got more. It didn't make their lives better. It actually broke their relationship with God and with each other and with creation. Now, it's important. I really want to say it's not that getting more is what broke their relationship. It's that they decided that the limitations, the boundaries that they lived in, that God had set up for them, they decided that they wanted to go past those boundaries. They wanted to do whatever it took to get more, even if it meant doing something they knew they weren't supposed to do. They weren't living inside of the limits that God gave them. It's funny because I was actually listening to a podcast this week. It was totally random, but this guy was talking about how for years, for decades, really, the U.S. has been known as a country of abundance. Like there is just a lot of everything. But they're not calling it a country of abundance anymore. That now they're actually calling it superabundance, which is a funny term. It's like, yeah, man, we're super abundant. But they say that there's more of everything than anyone could ever know, than anyone could ever actually realize. And maybe you've had an experience with this. Have you guys ever sat down on the sofa and pulled up Netflix and spent 45 minutes scrolling through all of the options? Or maybe like you wanted to eat and instead of just driving to whatever's closest, you pull up Postmates and you're scrolling through all of the options. And there's like this sense of getting stuck in trying to choose, trying to decide. And what they're finding is that actually having all of these options creates a sense of anxiety and stress for a lot of us. Having total freedom and total choice is not actually good for us. It's not what we want. They talk about artists, how artists that are given a few kind of limitations of saying, okay, we want you to paint a picture, but I want you to use the color orange and an elephant or whatever it is. It's like they have much more success. They feel this sense of ability to be able to make that art happen than if you just said anything at all. There's these things where limitations, they are healthy for us. God gave us these limitations. Adam and Eve, they didn't realize that they were living in paradise until they actually had to leave it. And I think it's common for people who end up with a serious health diagnosis, people who make a poor decision and kind of blow apart a marriage or a friendship or their finances. All of a sudden they say things. It's common for us to hear them say things like, I didn't realize what I had. Like you were in this situation where you had enough, where you had good things. You were in your own garden of sorts, but you didn't recognize what you had. And there's a lie that we all wrestle with. It was first sold to Adam and Eve, and it's shown up throughout history, and most of us have probably even wrestled with it this week. It's this lie that says God is not trustworthy. It's this lie that we start to wrestle with, a question of, is God trustworthy? Is he good? Is he loving? Is he actually going to provide? Is he going to meet my needs? In the garden, the serpent planted these 3 seeds that I think still kind of take root in each of our hearts today. He said these 3 phrases that I think are important for us to kind of look at. The first thing that he said is, did God really say that you must not eat from any tree in the garden? So that's not what God said, but he kind of plants this seed of doubt, this question of like, what is God holding back from you? Why doesn't he want you to have fruit from any of the trees? There's this question of why doesn't God want you to have everything that you want? The second thing he says is, you will not certainly die, which was a lie. God told them specifically in chapter 2, if you eat from this tree, you will die. And so he's telling them this other lie, this sense of God's not being honest with you. You can't trust God. He actually doesn't want you to have a full life. And then the third thing that he says is, you will be like God, which we may not use those words, but that is what we all want, right? Full control, everything we need, everything we desire, the ability to have coffee just delivered to me in my bed. I don't have to go downstairs to make it. That's what I would do with my all-consuming power, you guys. Coffee in bed. We have this desire, this longing for control, for power, for the ability for our ideas, our desires, our wants to be, this is what needs to happen. We all long for these things, these three lies, these seeds that Satan planted in the beginning. I think they still have an effect on us. And so to fight against these things, I think there's two kind of ideas that we need to be intentional about cultivating. And I use this word cultivate on purpose because it's not like an immediate decision or a switch that can be flipped. It's an ongoing process. We're not great at cultivating plants in our home. They die very quickly. We give them to Dave and Angie to bring them back to life. But there's this, apparently they need ongoing attention. I don't know. So there's this thing, this ongoing process. And the same thing has to happen for us to fight against these lies that we begin to believe. The first one is we have to cultivate a life of contentment, or a true sense of contentment. And the second thing is we have to cultivate a healthy view of who God is. There are these ongoing things of, okay, how do I continue to care for having a heart of contentment? How do I continue to cultivate this? How do I continue to care for and pay attention to my view of who God is? So I want to look at each of these briefly. We've talked about contentment before. It almost feels like a cliche to say that you should be content. It's like one of those things like, I know I should be content. But just because we know it, just because we hear it all the time, doesn't actually mean that we are. It doesn't actually mean that we don't need to focus on it, to work on it, that it's not still an issue for each of us. And when it comes to finances or money or stuff, what we have to realize with contentment is that enough as an idea, that's not actually a quantity. Enough isn't out there somewhere. Enough is a relationship that you actually cultivate, you build with the stuff that you have. You don't actually get to a place where you say, I have enough. You actually have to look at what you have, and you have to cultivate the sense of, I have enough. This is what I have. It's not a place you arrive to. It's something that you start to develop in your heart. And unless you work on that, you will never feel like you have enough. You'll always feel like you're lacking something, grasping for more. Any Full House fans out there? Man, I hated that show when I was a kid. I only watched it because it was on TV. And as a kid, I would watch anything that's on TV. I think that's true of most kids. But, Aunt Becky, Lori Loughlin, a few years ago, this whole case about the college admissions scandal. She paid a bunch of money to have her kid be able to make it into these super fancy schools. I was reading this article after her sentencing. It just happened to pop up on my news feed. I'm not really that invested in Lori Loughlin, for those of you guys that are curious. And it was fascinating, and I've saved this. It's probably been a year, maybe more, since I saved this. But at her sentencing, this is what the judge said. I want to read it to you. This is a quote of what he said. He says, "Here you are, an admired, successful professional actor with a long-lasting marriage. You got to kiss John Stamos." No, he doesn't say that, but two apparently healthy, resilient children, more money than you could possibly need, a beautiful home in Southern California, a fairy tale life. Yet you stand before me a convicted felon. And for what? And then this is the line that got me. It says, for the inexplicable desire to grasp even more. And if that doesn't describe all of our hearts, we may not all have like what she has, but this inexplicable desire to grasp even more. Most of us have enough. We may want more. We got a lot of desires, and that's okay. But this inexplicable desire to grasp even more, we have got to change our relationship with enough. It's not a place we'll get to. It's something that it's the relationship with what we have. Let me try that again. It's the relationship with what we already have. Eugene Peterson, he does a paraphrase of scriptures, and the way that he says Jesus' teaching in Matthew chapter 5 in the Beatitudes, I think is so powerful. He says this. He says, "You're blessed when you're content with just who you are. No more, no less. That is the moment you find yourselves proud owners of everything that cannot be bought." This sense of recognizing no more, no less, contentment with what I have. It's a cultivated relationship with the things that I already have. It's learning to love the garden that you're already in. It's finding joy in what you have while you still have it. So contentment is a huge piece, and it's not just a one-time thing. We have to continually work on it. The second piece of this is helicopters. The second piece of this, besides contentment, is, drum roll please, a healthy view of God. We have to cultivate a healthy view of God, again, because this isn't just something that we hear once and it's always good. We continue to kind of get these twists and turns and kind of incorrect, inaccurate perspectives of who God is. It's so important for us to understand who God is. I made this slide. I don't know if you guys can see it or not. The writing is kind of small. We'll post it on social media this week if you guys want to. But this is what we believe. This is what Scripture says who God is, that He is good, that He is our Father, that He is full of grace, He's merciful, that God is comforting, He is our healer, that He is just, that God is our provider, unchanging, all-powerful, with us, that God understands us, the creator and the sustainer of life. We've got to continually come back to accurately understanding and trying to accurately create this idea of who we believe God is, because when we're not intentional about it, we start to ask these questions like, can I really trust God? Does He really care? Does He actually have the power to change my situation? Is He actually listening to me? Can He even do something about this? And so one part of it is understanding who God is, and then the other piece of that is understanding the way that He sees us. Because our view of God has got to be accurate in His attributes, but also the way that He views us. And when He looks at you, He sees His dearly loved child. You've been marked with God's image, the imago Dei. You have infinite worth. God's promised not to forsake you. He's promised to take every bad and broken and painful thing that you go through and somehow pull good out of it. God understands you. Scriptures say that we are His workmanship, that we've been set free, that we're chosen by God. One of my favorite verses is this verse that says, it gave Him great joy to adopt us as His sons and daughters. It's not like this pity scheme of God's like, oh, these people can't figure it out. Let me see if I can help them. But it gave Him joy to choose you as sons and daughters. And as we start to have a healthy view of God and cultivate these things, we start to be able to beat back against those lies and say, is God really trustworthy? Does God really want to give me? Is He able to provide me with what I need? Does God really care about what's going on in my life? Because the enemy will continue to put thoughts in our minds. Did God really say that? Does He really care? Is He really trustworthy? It's an ongoing journey of alignment. I don't have a lot of skills, but probably the thing that I'm best at in life is parallel parking. I am very good. I can parallel park tiny cars and vans. I parallel parked my brother-in-law's Suburban. That thing's like a boat. We used to have a box truck. I could parallel park that. I am very, very good at parallel parking. The other person in my marriage is less good at parallel parking. I don't want to say names. You can only hit a curb so many times before you have to get the wheels aligned. And I think for us in our relationship with God and our view of who God is, we all are hitting curbs. We're all hitting painful moments in life. We're all going through difficult seasons, whether it's things of our own choosing, whether it's things that have been thrust upon us, whether it's health or finances or society or whatever it is. We all have these moments, and we have got to realize the need to realign our view of who God is, because after we keep hitting these walls, we can only do it for so long before we start to be, you know what? I don't know if He is good. I don't know if He actually does love me. I don't know if He actually does want to provide for me. It doesn't feel like it. That curb came out of nowhere. We have got to be intentional about cultivating contentment and continuing to remind ourselves the truths of who God is. Not what it feels like in the difficult moments, but what we truly believe. God has promised to provide for our needs in Philippians 4. we have to ask ourselves, what do we actually need? You know, God is trustworthy, but one of the challenges for us and the things that we kind of have to wrestle with is if God giving you what you want is a prerequisite of earning your trust, then you're not actually worshiping God. You're actually worshiping the things that you want. If God giving you your desires, every single desire you have, is a prerequisite of him being trustworthy, then we're not actually trusting God. We're not actually worshiping God. This is the thing that we most love, the thing we most care about. And if we can't have it, if he can't give it to us, then he's not trustworthy. He's promised to meet our needs. Not every desire, not every want, but to care for us. Proverbs 3:5-6 says, trust in the Lord with most of your heart. Just kidding. It says, trust in the Lord with all of your heart. And do not depend on your own understanding. Seek his will in all that you do, and he will show you which path to take. And there's like this extreme inclusivity in this verse. And it's really difficult. It's really challenging. All of our heart, all of our ways. Some aspects of our life are easier to surrender. Money, finances, stuff, that's one of the difficult things for us to surrender. Especially when we feel like we can have some sense of control. A lot of us find ourselves in a difficult situation. Maybe it's health, maybe it's, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's job loss, any number of things. And we have no control. And in that moment, it's really easy to trust God. It's like, you know what? I literally can do nothing. So I'm going to have to trust him. But other times in our lives, we actually have enough money that we can trust our bank account. We have enough power or influence that we can trust our own power and influence. We have enough control, we can kind of rely on ourselves, but we're called to trust in God with all of our hearts. We've got to wrestle this down. So, can God be trusted? Yes, he can. Over and over again, I've seen it in my life. Scriptures continue to articulate the goodness of God, and each one of us, while we may not have everything we desire, God has provided for our needs. Some of us may feel like we are somehow scraping the bottom of the barrel and we have been left and forgotten, but you are here and breathing, and somehow God is still providing for your needs. Some of us feel like we have an abundance, and we have to recognize that God is providing. We have to continue to work to embrace contentment and a healthy view of God. It does become a bit easier over time because we have opportunities to see that he makes good on his promises. Earlier this week, I came home from work, and I don't know that it was a great day because my wife wrote Bible verses all over the mirrors and the windows. And it was like, how was work today? How are the kids? Usually it's a sign of God help me. But it was funny because I went, and she had no idea what I was talking about this week. And I went in our bathroom. This verse was just written in giant letters on the mirror. And it says, let us hold tightly without wavering to the hope that we affirm, for God can be trusted to keep his promise. Can we read that last part together? For God can be trusted. Let's read that together. For God can be trusted to keep his promise. One more time for the kids in the back. For God can be trusted to keep his promise. We've got to continue cultivating a heart of contentment, a life of contentment, and continue realigning our healthy view, a true view of who God is. And as we do these things, it will allow us to interact with money, finances, having an abundance, not having quite what we want. It'll allow us to have a different relationship with stuff. This is a crucial first step. So a few questions, and I'll end with this. Some questions to kind of think through. The first one would be, how can you experience greater contentment? I don't have answers to these questions for you. This is like the homework piece. How can you experience greater contentment? What are some things that you could do some ways you could think, some actions you could take that will help you experience a greater sense of contentment. The second question is, how can you recognize the garden paradise you're in now? Which is comical, right? We probably don't feel that way. But what I want to say is, how can you recognize how God is providing for you right now and acknowledge that limitations can be a beautiful thing? There's so much freedom inside limitations. There's so much safety inside limitations. How can you acknowledge the garden that you're in now? And then the third question is, how can you regularly remind yourself that God can be trusted? Because we probably need that reminder a lot. So daily, hourly, weekly, what are some things that you can do in your life to remind yourself that God can be trusted? Some of us have circumstances right now where trusting God is the only option that you have. I know some people dealing with some significant health challenges. I know some people dealing with some tremendous financial challenges. The only thing that they can do is trust God. There is no other option. They have no other power. Maybe finances are difficult. Maybe health is strained. Relationships are struggling. You still need to actively cultivate contentment in your life, even with a little. It's a sense of saying no more, no less. God is meeting my needs, and I will continue to trust and rely on him. Some of us, we have circumstances where we need to practice contentment. Maybe you have the finances, you have the healthy relationships, you have the physical health. You need to develop a healthy relationship with what you have. Maybe if you feel comfortable financially, if you have blessed relationships, maybe you need to intentionally trust God. Maybe that looks like asking, why has God entrusted me with this? Why has God blessed me with more than enough? Why has God blessed me with these relationships? Why has God blessed me with my health? Asking these questions of how can I continue to trust God? How can I continue to develop contentment? How can I continue to have a healthy perspective of who God is crucial for each one of us. Let's bow our heads and pray together.